welcome. You're watching Macros with Mythili, where we take a hard look at all the major contemporary macroeconomic issues before the country. Well, if there's one major issue that's not only contemporary, but has been with us for decades, it is the issue of power shortages. Over the years, the government has tried almost everything. Unbundling generation, transmission and distribution, bringing in private players, promising assured returns, passing the Electricity Act, etc. to reform the sector. But we seem to have made so little progress that's even occasioned a tongue-in-cheek tweet from Salman Rushdie's parody account. The Booker Prize awardee tweets that in a rare account of non-partisan solidarity with city residents, Kejriwal, Sonia and Advani agree, life without power in Delhi is hell indeed. The same could be said about almost the entire country, not just Delhi. So to discuss what ails the power sector and come up with some possible answers, I'm joined by an eminent panel of experts. Suresh Prabhu, former Power Minister and architect of the Electricity Act, P. Umar Shankar, former Power Secretary, and Ravi Uppal, MD and CEO, Jindal Steel and Power Limited. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Prabhu, if I could start with you. If one were to really come to the crux of what really ails the power sector, would you agree that the main reason perhaps is that electricity is in a concurrent list? The states and the centre have a say. And this makes it very difficult because the states have no incentive to really reform the power sector when the centre keeps coming to their rescue again and again. How does one get over this moral hazard issue?
You know, first of all, you can't wish away the reality that there is a Constitution of India which governs the relationship between centre and state. For whatever good reason, the framers of the Constitution has put this subject into the concurrent list, and I would feel actually rightly so, because I don't know any other country, like maybe China, is the one country which looks at China has 700,000 villages, more than 750,000. But to manage a power sector distribution networks in spread over 600,000 villages that we have in the width and breadth of the country, from just one single location, it is impossible. So whether we like it or not, whatever the practical difficulties we may be facing because of this peculiarity of having state and centre both looking at the same sector, but it's a reality. So having accepted that reality, we must find out how best a federal government, central government, union government could work with the states, now 29, and some of the union territories to make sure that we have some sort of a national perspective and a national policy to look at power sector. So with great difficulty, we could get Electricity Act, which was impossible because most of the states were very opposed to that idea, thinking that we are intruding into their domain. But still we could manage to do that, and it is there now. Then we have more or less a structure made in India, which is called regulatory framework, in which all the states by law must have a regulator. They are in place. There is a central regulator. Then there is an appellate mechanism, which also has been put in place. So there is a structure, legislative structure in place. There is also a regulatory structure in place. Then we had a program called to look at some of the problems. What is the problem actually of the power sector? Obviously, there is a demand and supply mismatch. Demand is rising, supply is not keeping pace. But this is only one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is quality of power. We are not able to give quality that people want. We are not able to give reliable power. That means we are not able to give them 24/7 power. So this is the second set of problems. Thirdly, why this is happening, I'll come to it. But thirdly, the other problem is people are feeling that power is there, but I cannot afford it. Like for example, if you are going to put up a nuclear power plant, and which is going to sell at 8 or 10 rupees a kilowatt hour, nobody wants to buy it. And firstly, ultimate consumer cannot pay for it, so DISCOM may buy it, and then they are not able to pass on the same tariff burden to the consumer, so they are actually becoming bankrupt. So with all the issues, we had actually solved it in a way by making legislative framework, regulatory framework, and then we clean the balance sheet of all the state electricity boards. At that time, they were called as SEBs because they were not, that particular time, we had not been able to privatize them, not able to corporatize them. So all of them, we have cleaned it.
I could just turn to Mr. Umar Shankar there and ask you. You said you cleaned up the balance sheets of the SEBs. But the fact is that today they're once again in a mess. So isn't that related to the fact that the SEBs have no incentive really to do a permanently good act? Because the centre comes to their rescue. What do you think, Mr. Umar Shankar?
We have really moved quite a bit from the initial days of 1947, when our capacity to generate power is about 1100 megawatts to about 2.5 lakh megawatts. We've traveled a long distance. The question definitely is that much more needs to be done. Just like Mr. Prabhu mentioned, that power is such a commodity that the more you make it available, the more there will be demand. So that is what is happening. It's a question of trying to catch up with the demand which is happening. That is one. Secondly, I agree with Mr. Prabhu that this cannot but be in the concurrent list. It's basically a state subject, and it has been put in the concurrent list because central government can also help and aid the states in what needs to be done. The third point is that the center does not really come to the rescue of states in that sense. Even if you look at the cleaning up of the balance sheet that Mr. Prabhu mentioned, I suppose he is referring to the 2003 what is called a bailout package. Dr. Ahluwalia chaired that. What was done basically was the central government was helping the SEBs to ensure that the dues to the central government outfits were met. There are a lot of dues which were owed to, say, NTPC or Power Grid or the Coal India and so on. They were all Government of India enterprises, and Government of India, in a sense, in its own heightened self-interest, did all this bailout to see to it that those monies to these organizations came back. So that is what was done. This time, for instance, we had also organized one more financial restructuring in 2012. The idea there was to ensure that the previous hangover of all those debts and so on and the losses are in some way restructured. The burden is less on the central government and more on the state government. Last time when we did the bailout in 2003, what we failed was we cleaned up the balance sheet in a sense, the way Mr. Prabhu mentioned, but we never made it a precondition for the states to take certain steps. Okay. This time around in the financial restructuring, what we have done is, we learned from the last package, we have put preconditions for actions to be taken by the state government, the distribution companies and so on, so that the incentives which will flow under the financial restructuring plan to the distribution company or to the state government from the central government will be dependent on the actions that the states will take in terms of distribution reform.
Just hold your thoughts there, Mr. Umashankar, because we'll address this question later. But let me now turn to Mr. Ravi Uppal, who is a player, has been at the receiving end of government policies and the bureaucrats' execution of that policy. How do you view this fact that it's in the concurrent list? Do you think it really hampers reform in the power sector, Mr. Uppal?
Well, you know that it's a fact that is in the concurrent list. I think both states and centers have to work together on this issue. We need to evolve a common national agenda on power. There has to be a lot more active dialogue between the federal government and the state governments. I think which has to be backed up by a very detailed study of the states and their requirements of power. And I think it's not such a difficult, idea to, not such a difficult thing to evolve a common consensus as to what remains to be done at the state level. I think the basic thing is that the states are making power as a part of their political agenda. And I think the power has now come to such a status where we need to, rise above that. And there must be a broad consensus which is made around power, how we should avoid cross-subsidization of power. What is the role of the state distribution company? Should we go private for distribution? The fuel, we cannot wish away the center's role, because if you look at India's geography, the power comes from different places, different sources. Somewhere you take it from coal, somewhere you take it from hydro. Another location you can take it from renewables. So therefore we need to bring, evolve a concept of a national grid and a state grid and a regional grid. That will only happen when center plays a very active role, brings all the states together to see how we can overcome the shortages of power. But we have to move away from this regime of subsidizing power at the state level, because what we are trying to do right now is to address only the symptoms of problems, but we are not hitting at the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that the state electricity boards, whether you build them out at the state level or at the center level, you have to make them self-sufficient, self-sustaining. Otherwise, you will continue to have this kind of intervention from the central level. Every now and then you bring a bailout package, but that's not a lasting solution.
I agree. And let me now turn to Mr. Prabhu, who as the architect of the Electricity Act did really wonders, in fact, to try and end this system. In fact, the Electricity Act, unlike the legal framework in many other sectors, is perhaps one of the few acts which really has very few flaws. But in terms of whatever it desired to do, whether it is open access, trading, etc., none of this has been achieved. Is it, Mr. Prabhu, because the regulators have not delivered? And is it because the kind of regulators, this is a question I'm going to ask Mr. Umashankar also, is it because most of the regulators have come from his tribe, from the administrative service, who who have not been able to take independent technical decisions. Why is it that the Electricity Act did not deliver? You hoped for so much. What went wrong?
You know, one is, of course, we really just appointing regulator is not a solution to the problem. It's only a beginning of a process. So obviously the quality of regulation, the type of people who are going to run that regulation is ultimately going to decide to what extent the entire purpose for which the law was enacted, through which the regulators are appointed now, is successful. So you cannot accomplish the mission, the spirit of the law, unless the regulation is really on the ground happening the way it was intended. So if you can call it a legal parlance, the intention of the legislature, but you know, here it is not getting reflected in the regulation. So we have to look at the entire process of appointment of regulator, what is the quality of regulators, how they should be doing the regulation, and there should be accountability on regulators as well. I used to tell the regulators, because the first time the regulators were working, when as a Minister of Power, I used to tell them that your job is not only increase tariff. That is one part. You have to increase, but not only that is a job. You have to rationalize the tariff. You have to reduce the cross subsidization, which was there in the earlier version of the law, subsequently was amended. But the idea was to remove the cross subsidization. The third part was how to reduce the transmission and distribution losses to improve efficiency into the system. You know, if you do not work on all this, and to make this, the regulator must be technically competent, technologically savvy, financially aware, so that he understands the entire dimension of this.
Well, I'm afraid on that note, we'll have to slip into a very short break, but we'll be back very soon to continue with Macros with Mythili on power sector reforms. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, where we're discussing the problems and the possible solutions, really, of the power sector. Mr. Umashankar, if I could turn to you, Mr. Prabhu also agreed that the quality of the regulation leaves much to be desired. Now, is it because regulators in the recent past have all been from the tribe of retired IAS officers who really are generalists and who have no technical knowledge of the sector and have also hesitated to take harsh decisions, periodically revising the tariffs? We've just seen that the Power Ministry is asking the state regulators that please do your revision of tariffs. Is it because the quality of the regulators is wanting?
You see, the regulatory commission consists of more than one person. It is not just one IAS officer who's there. There is a technical person, there's a legal person, there's a finance person, and so on. It's a regulatory body. It is not just one person. So you cannot say that because of that one person who comes there without technical background, the entire thing has been vitiated. I don't agree with that. I would definitely not argue with this fact that selection of regulators has left much to be desired. It has definitely been seen as a parking slot for people from various backgrounds. Why not IAS officers? Why only IAS officers? Also people from other backgrounds. So the person, the quality of the person who is selected to be part of that regulatory commission has to definitely be improved. Only then the kind of regulation that the person gives will be better. The second point is, you have appointed the regulatory commission independently. If those people decide not to exercise their independence, there is nothing, very little that you can do. So how do you ensure that an independently appointed regulatory commission functions independently? That is actually the challenge. So there has also been some thoughts about holding them accountable. What kind of a mechanism can you put in place which will see to it that these people are held to account as to the kind of decisions that they take? I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do, in a sense that you're going to have a kind of a referee for a referee, you know. That is the kind of situation it is leading us to. But the entire thing is because of a lot of politics. And very often, I'm not saying every regulator is like this, very often the regulatory commission willing to be part of the entire game of politics. Now, I would like to go back a minute to what Mr. Uppal had said about developing a consensus. One of the things that we saw was agriculture subsidy, subsidized agriculture, free agriculture power. All this has wreaked havoc on the finances of the SEBs. This was recognized in the early 90s. 1991, there was a committee to look into the matter. 1996, there was a meeting of the chief ministers headed by the Prime Minister, which decided that agriculture will be charged 50 paise per unit, and within 3 years, they'll ensure that 50% of the cost of service will be recovered in agriculture. Nothing happened. There was consensus. So that's why I feel that somehow we have to take it outside the purview of entire politics and see to it that regulators are forced to function independently. I'd like to say one thing. I, as the Secretary of the Department, appeal to the appellate tribunal to review the function of the regulatory commissions insofar as setting up of fixing tariffs are concerned. They passed a salutary order, the result of which was in the year 2012, all the states revised tariffs. So you need to move to a mechanism which is beyond politics.
So try and take it beyond politics.
Beyond politics.
So now
the only other way you can force this is a person who is going to fund the distribution company. He has enough leverage to see to it that the distribution companies move along the path of distribution reforms, because he can turn off the tap of finances.
Yes, please speak on.
Just very small point.
Yes.
In fact, I must remind my friend that only when between 2000 and 2002 we have been successful as a power minister. I went and made the chief minister of Tamil Nadu, chief minister of Punjab. We had stopped free power in India for the first time, which was then started in 2004 when Andhra Pradesh had a new chief minister, Y.S.R. Reddy. He started again giving free power. But we had stopped free power for the first time after several decades in India when I was the power minister.
Well, nobody will dispute the fact, Mr. Prabhu, that you were a really good power minister. But now let me just turn to Mr. Ravi Uppal and ask him, as a player, Ravi, one of the biggest problems really has been the issue of fuel supply linkages. In fact, the 12th plan document says this is a top priority. How does one address the issue really of stranded capacity? What does one do about fuel supply linkages?
Well, fuel has been one of the biggest problems facing the industry today. It's strange that about 2 years ago, the total PLF of the thermal industry was about 78%, and now by the end of March, it has come down to nearly 64%. So it's in spite of the fact a lot of new capacity has come, PLF has come down, and one of the main causes for this is that there's no fuel. The government has been suggesting all kind of solutions, which I will call them not properly thought through, very theoretical. They are saying that you can take 65% coal through the linkage and gradually it will go up to 80%. That how many power plants can really sustain themselves in an economical way if they're going to get 65% of their fuel? I can tell you hardly anyone. For any plant to run financially in a viable way, you need at least about 80% plus plant load factor. And when then you're going through the PPA regime where the rates are fiercely competitive, they don't leave you much of margin. The merchant market has become so tight. In the months of winter and monsoon, the rates plummet to a rate as low as 150, which does not even cover your fuel cost. So you can see two contrasting situations. On one side, you don't get the fuel. Secondly, even if you're getting fuel, this is not adequate. Thirdly, that you're completely tied to the kind of PPAs that you get from electricity boards. So therefore, the power producers, especially the private producers today, are really in a bind. They have invested billions of dollars to raise the capacity. I must sort of hasten to add here, India's power capacity never went beyond 20 to 22,000 megawatt when it was only the public sector which was putting in the generation capacity. But only after the private sector came into play, you were adding as much as nearly 50 to 60,000 megawatt in every 5-year plan. So let's not forget the role which is played by them, but let's not today sort of turn a blind eye to what is happening to them. And fuel, as you said, is one of the key issues. I think the government has to take the most urgent steps to make sure they get their share of fuel.
Absolutely. Mr. Prabhu, I can quickly turn the question to you, that the private sector has become very important. So what does one do about fuel supply linkages? And one last question, what can one learn from the Gujarat experience, the Gujarat Jyotigram program? Can that be replicated all over the country? So two very quick questions, and then if you have time, we'll turn it over to the other panelists as well.
First of all, Gujarat story shows us that farmers are willing to pay if they are given assured power. And this was my experience too when I talked to all the farmers organizations in India asking their opinion about free power, because they said free power is no power. So I think they've convinced about it, so they are willing to pay for it at reasonable rate if it is assured power and if it comes at a time when they need it. So this Gujarat experience even corroborates that evidence very clearly. Now the second part is private sector. Now the private sector is a very critical part of it for a simple reason, is that if you take overall, it is not possible to create a capacity that government needs to create with their own money. Because first of all, government is running fiscal deficit. There is no money available with the state governments. So therefore, it is inevitable that we really need to get them on board. And that's what we did in Electricity Act. We de-licensed generation. So now it is possible. Now, some part of the Electricity Act, like open access, if you bring it into play, the competition will come in. We'll be able to create overall, over a period of time, the power market that is really necessary. It is part of the vision. But unless you go step by step and make it happen, 10 years have passed and we lost a great opportunity to actually implementing the spirit of the law. But anyway, this has happened. So now, I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at it afresh, find out, because there's a new government in place, the Prime Minister himself is very focused on energy. In fact, I would not see any other Prime Minister who has so much of clear vision about energy. So I think we should try to work on that. And I'm very clear about one thing, that if you actually getting private sector only is not a solution, but not to get private sector also is not a solution. Okay. So we should be selective to find out where the private sector can come and play a role. Like for example, look at some of the models. Of course, that needs to be properly structured. Is that if you get private sector into some part of distribution, it works. But you know, they also need stability. They also need some freedom. So I think some places where private sector has come in, we have seen great efficiency improvement. Some places it has not happened. So we really need to select private players also very carefully to find out how they could be able to play. So enlightened private sector is what is really necessary. A proper restructured public sector is also essential, because these are sectors in which we need them. So it is a real private-public partnership of a different kind with an innovative approach with a completely changed mindset is something which can actually address the issue very carefully.
Absolutely. But electricity for all by 2022 is what the Prime Minister has promised. Is the Gujarat model a way forward, Mr. Umar Shankar? One last quick word from you, and then if possible, we'll turn over to Mr. Uppal also.
This you mentioned about the Jyoti Gram Yojana. This is, I think, an excellent scheme, which is to separate the feeders that supply power to the villages, a separate feeder for agriculture and separate feeder for rural households and so on. This has been done implemented extremely well in Gujarat to ensure that the quality and the quantity of power available to the rural households had increased tremendously, so that they could assure them of more than 22 hours of supply. I would also like to say that there have been some state governments which have done a similar kind of thing. Rajasthan has done feeder separation. Madhya Pradesh is in the process of doing it. Maharashtra has done a bit of it. Haryana has done it. In fact, I remember as Secretary of the Ministry, in our working group, we proposed that this should be taken up as a national scheme, but only in states where the agriculture consumption is very high. In fact, we had mentioned that 20% agriculture consumption, if a state consumes more than 20% of the total consumption of the state in agriculture, then we should look at feeder separation for agriculture. But we must clearly define what are our objectives for the feeder separation.
So, Mr. Uppal, let me have a last word from you. That would you like to see the Gujarat model replicated all over the country? As a player, how would you react to that?
Well, the Gujarat model has definitely been a good model in terms of distribution and making sure that the power does get delivered to the end users. But I just want to say one thing more here, that we keep talking about the cost of power. Earlier, Mr. Prabhu said that farmers are willing to pay money as long as you give them reliable power. So I think that's the starting point. We've got to make sure that we deliver power to all the end users, including the farmers. And we have a graded structure of tariffs in which up to certain consumption levels, you can keep low tariff, and for the other peer sections which can afford more, like residential sector, commercial sector, you can price it a little higher. So the quality of power, reliability power is very important. I would like to state here that still at the national level, the total T&D losses are in the range of 25 to 26%, out of which the technical losses account for about 13 to 14. The balance are basically commercial losses or leakage losses in revenue. I think we need to plug it in. And let me quote you an example of a city like Bangalore, which is one of the most efficient distribution model which is developed, where the collections are nearly 90%, and in the whole of Karnataka, Bangalore is the only city which is giving them surplus revenue and is giving them profit. So I think execution holds the key to all the good intentions that we have. We must execute all the policies that we do, otherwise this will only end up only as a paper exercise, and our problems are going to perpetuate.
So rational pricing and proper execution are key to the problems in the power sector. But I'm afraid on that note, we really run out of time. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. It's really been a very interesting discussion. Thank you also for watching Macros with Mythili. But we'll be back next week, same time. Until then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.